chosen ones. There is a sound that does not belong to this age, yet it still reaches you. It is not the roar of the ocean or the whisper of wind through stone. It is older, heavier, and it speaks your name in a language no mortal was meant to understand. Long before the empires you know, before Rome's first road and Egypt's first stone, there was a city that floated in the mind of the gods, Atlantis. Not a myth, not a dream, but a pulse of power on the face of the earth, breathing in sync with the stars. Its towers rose higher than clouds, its streets shimmered with crystal light, and its knowledge made the rest of the world feel like shadows staring at the sun. But even in perfection, there was a fracture, and that fracture was you. They called you the key, not because you unlocked doors, but because you opened what should have stayed closed. You carried a resonance that could bend the flow of water, make the ground beneath you hum, and turn crystal veins into rivers of pure energy. The Atlantean Council did not fear war, famine, or time. They feared you. You were not born among them. You appeared as if the ocean itself had delivered you to their gates. They studied you, praised you, and tried to keep you close. But the closer you came to the city's heart, the more its foundations began to quake. You felt it too. The crystals would flicker when you walked past. The water in their great channels would rise without command. The sky above would split in silent flashes when you stood on the central spire. And then, the voices started. Not voices in the air, voices from beneath the waves, from the bedrock, from the very bones of Atlantis. They told you something no one else could hear, a truth that curled around your mind like a serpent made of light. It wasn't destruction they spoke of. It was awakening. But in awakening, there is always something that must be broken. And you, chosen one, were the break. The city woke to silence, though no one understood it at first. The markets bustled, the fountains poured their endless silver streams, and the crystal towers still threw light into the morning mist. But something in the air felt heavier, as if the breath of Atlantis itself had slowed. The great crystal at the city's center, the Heartstone, was never supposed to falter. Its glow was said to be drawn from the first dawn, captured and held by the ancients who built Atlantis from the ocean floor upward. It powered the towers, fed the channels, and bound the people to the rhythm of the tides. But on that morning, the light was no longer pure. Shadows bled at its edges. You were there when it happened. Standing at the edge of the reflection pool, you watched the shimmer within the crystal stutter, as though it were remembering something too painful to bear. Around you, no one seemed to notice at first. A merchant haggled over sea silk. A child tossed a silver coin into the water. Yet you felt the tremor that ran through the ground beneath your feet, a tremor no one else seemed to feel. The council had always claimed the Heartstone could not die, that it was beyond the reach of mortal error. But they did not understand what had been planted within it long before their rule. You had seen visions in your sleep, towers crumbling under black waves, the crystal's light shattering into 1,000 fragments. Each dream ended the same way, with you standing at the center of it all. As the day stretched on, the dimness grew. By midday, the crystal's brilliance had waned enough for whispers to begin. Old priests touched their amulets and muttered to themselves. Sailors spoke of strange swells rising beyond the breakwaters. The air seemed to thicken, and the gulls abandoned the skies above the harbor. You walked closer to the Heartstone, and for a brief moment, you saw your reflection inside it. Not on the surface, but deep within its core. It was older, unfamiliar, yet it was you. And behind that reflection, something moved, something that did not belong to this world. It was not the dimming of a crystal, it was the drawing of a curtain. The library of Atlantis was not a place open to all. Built beneath the Temple of Tides, it was carved into living rock, lit only by the glow of molten crystal veins that pulsed like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Few were permitted to enter, and fewer still returned unchanged. It was there the scroll was kept, a relic so old that even the oldest scribes refused to guess its origin. You did not seek it. It sought you. The keeper of records, a man whose eyes seemed fixed always on horizons beyond the walls, placed it in your hands without speaking. The scroll was bound with golden thread, frayed but unbroken, and the seal upon it bore a mark you had seen once before, in a dream, where a man walked across waters that bent to his will. When the seal fell away, the air around you thickened. The script upon the parchment was not Atlantean, nor any language of the known earth. Yet, as your eyes traced its shapes, the meaning unfolded in your mind as though you had always known it. It spoke of a city destined to fall from within, not by war nor by famine, but by the awakening of one who carried the echo of the Nazarene. It told of a voice that had once stilled storms, a light that could not be dimmed, and a cross that would appear when the waters rose. It did not name you, yet every word felt carved into the marrow of your bones. The scroll warned that when the crystal heart faltered, the one bearing the shadow of the Nazarene would be faced with a choice: to preserve the city's glory, or to shatter it so the truth beneath could surface. In the final lines, the ink thinned into something almost like blood, spelling a phrase you dared not read aloud. You closed the scroll, but the words did not release you. They moved inside your thoughts, rearranging them, pulling you toward a path you did not want to see. Above, through the stone ceiling, you heard the faint roar of waves striking the harbor wall harder than before. Somewhere in the temple, a bell began to ring, not for prayer, but for warning. The throne room of Atlantis was unlike any hall in the known world. Its floor was carved from a single slab of black stone, polished until it reflected every torchlight like still water. Columns of crystal spiraled upward, catching the glow of the Heartstone far above and scattering it into shifting rainbows across the vaulted ceiling. At the room's center sat the throne, empty. It was never empty. The High Regent had ruled for as long as anyone remembered, a figure shrouded in ritual and mystery, whose presence was said to keep the tides in balance and the winds in favor. Yet on that day, when you entered through the gilded doors, the air hung heavy with absence. Guards stood rigid at their posts, their eyes fixed ahead, but not one dared to speak. The throne itself bore signs of haste. The cushion was askew, one armrest chipped as if struck by force, and a faint trail of water stained the steps below. The regent's crown, a circlet of woven crystal filaments, was gone. You approached the dais, every step echoing through the silent chamber. No one moved to stop you. In the reflection on the floor, you caught a glimpse of yourself framed by the towering crystal columns. For a moment, the reflection was not your own. It was a figure robed in deep blue, wearing the missing crown, its eyes fixed on you with something between accusation, and recognition. The guards shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, but still they said nothing. You asked where the regent had gone, but no answer came. Only the sound of distant waves rumbling against the city walls reached your ears. A single parchment lay at the foot of the throne. Its edges were damp, the ink blurred, but the message was clear enough to pierce the silence. The sea is coming. The crown will not stop it. As you held the parchment, the torches flickered. The colors in the crystal columns shifted from warm gold to cold blue, and the air grew chill. Somewhere deep below, you felt the ground tremble, not with the strength of an earthquake, but with the slow, deliberate movement of something vast. The throne remained empty, but the room felt anything but unoccupied. The temple doors groaned as they opened, their weight resisting the pull of your hands. Inside, the air was thick with salt and incense, as though the ocean itself had seeped into the stone. The walls were carved with endless spirals, each one telling a fragment of the city's history. Victories at sea, harvests from the deep, and the coronations of rulers long turned to dust. At the far end, past the altar of crystal and coral, stood an archway sealed by a slab of translucent stone. Through it, you could see a faint glow, like moonlight trapped beneath the surface. No one was allowed beyond that arch, except those called by the verse. The priests had spoken of it only in whispers. A single line of words carved into the foundation of Atlantis, older than the city itself. They claimed it was not written by mortal hand, but left by the one who had walked upon the waters of another age. When the verse was read aloud, the tides would obey, splitting as they once had for those who followed him through the impossible. The slab began to shift before you touched it. Light spilled out, flooding the chamber in silver. You stepped inside, the echo of your footsteps muffled by the strange stillness that lay beyond. There it was, etched into a block of stone so ancient its surface had worn smooth, except for the letters that refused to fade. You could not help but read it. The words poured from your lips in a language you did not know, yet understood completely. With each syllable, the ground trembled, and a sound like 1,000 waves pulling back at once filled your ears. Outside the temple, the ocean responded. The great harbor emptied in moments, ships tilting on their sides as water fled from the shore. Fish flopped helplessly on the exposed seabed, and the people cried out in confusion and fear. The horizon stretched farther and farther away, the sea drawn back as though by an unseen hand. The verse ended, but the silence that followed was heavier than before. The air tasted of storms, and in the distance, a single black wave rose higher than the city walls. The war chamber was lit by a single ring of crystal lamps, their glow casting long shadows over the great map that dominated the table. It was not a map of land, but of the surrounding ocean, every current, trench, and reef meticulously marked in shimmering ink. Small, crystal markers indicated the positions of the city's fleets, arranged in perfect formation to guard the trade routes and ward off unseen threats from beyond the horizon. General Kyle stood over the map, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on a single point far from the city. His officers waited in a tense semicircle, but no one spoke. The Heartstone's dimming had already sent ripples of unease through every rank of the Atlantean Guard, and now the tides themselves had begun to shift unnaturally, pushing the city into uncharted peril. You entered quietly, though the sound of the door seemed to startle him. For a man known to face storms without flinching, the way he turned from the map was almost defensive, as though he had been caught looking at something forbidden. "What do you see?" you asked, your gaze falling to the spot where his hand had been resting. It was a point beyond the deepest trench, marked only by a faint symbol that looked more like a wound than a landmark. He didn't answer. Instead, he swept his arm across the table, sending several markers clattering to the floor. The officers flinched but remained silent. His voice, when it came, was low and unsteady. "There is no formation that will hold against what's coming. No line we can draw to keep it out. The sea doesn't obey our ships anymore." You moved closer, catching the faint smell of salt water and copper on him, as if he had already been to the place the map avoided. His eyes met yours briefly, and you saw something you had not expected. Not fear of the ocean, but of the choice ahead. Kyle turned away, his hands gripping the edge of the table until the crystal groaned under the strain. "The regent is gone. The council will look to me for orders, but I will not lead them into a battle that was lost before it began." Without another word, he walked past you, leaving the map bare, the symbol still glowing faintly in its place. Beneath the palace, deeper than the council vaults and the temple catacombs, there was a chamber few had ever seen. It was said to be carved before Atlantis itself existed, a hollow in the bedrock where the ocean's pulse could be felt through the walls. You had been led there by silence, a silence so complete it seemed to press against your thoughts, guiding you downward. The passage narrowed until you had to turn sideways to move through it. The air grew colder, the stones damp beneath your fingers. At last, the corridor opened into a space unlike anything above. It was perfectly circular, its walls lined with smooth black stone that reflected no light. At the center stood a single pedestal, and upon it, something that should not have been there, a cross. It was not Atlantean in design. Made of weathered wood, bound by simple iron, it carried none of the ornate craft the city was known for. Yet it shone faintly, as though lit from within, casting long shadows across the chamber floor. You approached, your footsteps echoing in a rhythm that felt familiar. A slow, steady beat, like the walk of someone carrying a burden toward a hill. The closer you came, the heavier the air became, until each breath felt drawn from deep water. Your hand hovered above the wood, and for a moment the chamber shifted. You were no longer underground, but standing on the shore of a distant land, watching a man kneel beside the waves. His robe clung to him, wet from the sea, and his hands traced the sign of the cross into the sand before the tide washed it away. A voice moved through the air, not loud, but impossible to ignore. "When the waters rise, remember the sign. It is the key that opens what is hidden, and the weight that breaks what is false." You blinked, and the vision was gone. The cross remained before you, silent, yet unshaken by the chill that now swept through the room. Somewhere above, a deep groan rumbled through the stone, as though the city itself had shifted in its sleep. The pedestal trembled. The cross tilted slightly toward you, and the sound of rushing water began to fill the air. The storm had not yet broken, but the city could feel it waiting. The air was heavy with salt, the streets slick with mist, and the distant crash of waves had grown into a steady, threatening drumbeat. From the upper terraces, you could see the waterline higher than it had any right to be, pressing against the outer walls like a living thing impatient to strike. The path to the seal was not marked on any map. It wound through narrow alleys, down forgotten stairways, and into a half-buried courtyard where the stone bore the scars of ancient tides. At its center lay a round slab carved with spirals so intricate they seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. A single guardian stood watch, an old woman in a cloak the color of deep water. Her eyes were sharp despite her age, and when you approached, she did not move aside. "Once it is opened," she said, her voice low, "there will be no closing it again. The sea will claim what is hers." You asked her why it had been sealed in the first place. Her gaze did not waver, because what lies beyond was never meant for the hands of men. The waves struck the outer wall with a force that sent tremors through the ground. Dust fell from the stones above. The guardian stepped aside. Kneeling before the seal, you traced the spirals with your fingertips. The stone was cold, but beneath the surface, you felt movement, a slow, swirling pull, like the turning of a massive lock. Each rotation you followed made the air thicker, the sound of the ocean louder. Somewhere deep within, mechanisms older than Atlantis groaned to life. The final spiral ended at the center, where a single crystal was embedded. It pulsed once, twice, then cracked with a sharp sound that echoed through the courtyard. The spirals lit up in pale blue light, racing outward like veins filling with water. From beyond the slab came a low, resonant roar, not of anger, but of something vast remembering its freedom. The stone shifted. A thin line of seawater began to creep through the cracks, winding toward your feet. Night had fallen, but the temple blazed with light. Crystals embedded in the walls glowed as if lit from within, their radiance spilling across the marble floors. Priests moved in hurried silence, their robes whispering against the stone, their eyes avoiding yours. Something was being prepared, not for the city, but for you. They led you past the main altar into a narrow hallway lined with towering statues. Each figure held a different object, a cup, a staff, a tablet, but all wore the same expression, a gaze fixed far beyond the walls as though awaiting a signal. At the hall's end stood a set of bronze doors etched with waves and stars. The moment you crossed their threshold, the sound began. It was not chanting nor the hum of the ocean, but something deeper, a psalm. Its words were not Atlantean, yet their meaning unfolded inside you as naturally as breath. You could hear the rise and fall of the melody as if sung by voices both near and impossibly far away. The stone itself seemed to vibrate, each note trembling through the walls and into your bones. At the center of the chamber, a circle of priests knelt around an open scroll. The parchment glowed faintly, the ink shifting as though alive. One of them looked up at you, his eyes wide not with fear, but with recognition. The psalm spoke of waters that would rise to wash away all that was false, leaving only what was true. It told of a voice that calmed the seas, and a touch that turned the depths into paths of dry ground. A shadow of the Nazarene lingered in every line, not as a distant figure, but as if his presence was woven into the very breath of the song. As the final verse was sung, the air in the room changed. The glow from the walls faded to a pale blue, and the temperature dropped as though the ocean had pressed itself against the temple from the outside. The scroll rolled closed on its own, the sound of its movement echoing unnaturally long. Then the psalm ended, leaving a silence so complete it felt like the moment before a great wave breaks. The night sky over Atlantis had always been a tapestry of clarity, stars scattered like shards of crystal, and the moon casting its silver road across the sea. But as the hour approached, the light began to fade. Clouds did not gather, and no storm obscured the heavens. Instead, the moon itself dimmed, its glow sinking into a shadow that rose from below rather than above. From the harbor to the highest spire, people stopped to look upward. Whispers rippled through the streets. Then silence spread as though the city had collectively forgotten how to breathe. The tide's rhythm faltered, pulling back in unnatural pauses. Even the ever-present hum of the Hearthstone seemed to still. You stood on the terrace of the eastern watchtower, the vantage point where the moon always rose over the open ocean. Tonight, its path was wrong. It seemed to drift, not along the arc of the stars, but toward a point above the city itself. And with every inch it moved, the shadow deepened. Beneath your feet, the stone shivered. At first, you thought it was the tremor of distant waves striking the sea wall. But then, the vibrations resolved into a pulse, slow, steady, deliberate. It matched the rhythm you had felt in the deepest chamber, the heartbeat of something vast. A sudden flash lit the horizon, not from lightning, but from beneath the waves. Columns of pale light surged upward through the ocean, twisting like the limbs of some immense creature. The shadow over the moon thickened until its edges blurred, leaving only a faint outline where its silver should have been. Behind you, a bell tolled once, its sound muffled as though swallowed by water before reaching your ears. The air grew heavy, and the sense of salt and stone intensified. The reflection of the moon on the water below twisted, as if the sea itself had turned to liquid glass and something beneath was pressing against it. For a moment, you thought you saw the shadow take form, not shapeless darkness, but the curve of something ancient, watching, waiting. The moon did not return its light, and the sea did not wait any longer. The city was no longer a place of sound, but of held breath. Every street lay still, every torch burned without flicker, and even the wind seemed to have forgotten its path. You stood at the edge of the central plaza, where the Hearthstone's glow had once been a constant sun. Now it pulsed faintly, each dim beat slower than the last, as though marking the city's final moments. The ocean's voice surrounded you, not in crashing waves, but in a deep, endless hum that came from every direction at once. It was the same resonance you had carried since the day you arrived in Atlantis, the one the council feared and the priests whispered about. Tonight, it was no longer hidden within you. It was speaking through you. Across the plaza, the gates to the Temple of Tides stood open. Water pooled at their threshold, trickling down the steps, though the sea itself was still far from the walls. The flow was not rushing inward. It was waiting, as if the ocean were standing just beyond the threshold, leaning close. The air thickened. The ground beneath you trembled, not with violence, but with inevitability. From somewhere unseen came the sound of something vast shifting into place, as though locks had been undone in the deep. The faint glow of the Hearthstone flared once, then dimmed so far it was barely more than an ember. Your breath synced with the rhythm of the ocean's hum. In that moment, you saw flashes. The throne without a crown, the cracked seal, the cross in the hidden chamber, the verse that split the tides. Each image layered over the next, until the city itself seemed to be made of memory, ready to dissolve into whatever came after. From the harbor, a low roar began to build. It was not the chaotic cry of waves in storm, but a single, sustained breath drawn in by the sea. The surface beyond the walls rose, not in a crest, but in a towering curve, as though the ocean had decided to stand. The water paused there, impossibly held, reflecting the dim light of the dying Heartstone. Then, without warning, it began to fall.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.